Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Saka. Ukraine is grappling with security and economic challenges which could bring the nation to its knees. The country needs a new generation of strong, reform-minded leaders. But does it need my guest today? He's Mikheil Saakashvili, the former president of neighboring Georgia, recently appointed governor of Ukraine's strategically vital Odessa region. He knows all about confrontation with Vladimir Putin, but is he a credible or wise addition to Ukraine's hard-pressed government? Mikheil Saakashvili, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for bringing me back in this new capacity.
Well, new capacity. On the face of it, this is one of the most bizarre political appointments I can ever remember. You were a national president, now you are a regional governor in somebody else's country. Well, what on earth is going on?
Not just another country, not just another region, not just another time. This is a very challenging time, and everything I ever fought for, or dreamt about, or stood up for, basically is at stake right now in Ukraine. And Ukraine's fate, on the other hand, is at stake in Odessa, in the south of Ukraine, because that's where things are being played out and decided together with the East. So, and this is the largest region of Ukraine. So it's a very unusual situation, and with unusual times we live in, we need to make some unusual steps. And well, that's what the President Poroshenko and we did together.
I don't think Ukrainians see you as a native. They see you as somebody who's been parachuted in.
No, I think Ukrainians are very supportive. That was one of the things when people tried to question outsiders when I went to Odessa. But the way how I've been welcomed by a very wide range of interests there, all kind of people from all different ethnic backgrounds. Ukraine is a very big melting pot, and we're not only me. There's a whole team of Georgians. You know, head of actually the Ukrainian police. De facto national police head is a Georgian lady from my team, basically one of the most active Ukrainian prosecutor, top anti-prosecutor, corruption prosecutor of Ukraine is from my team. The number 2 in their anti-corruption service and number 2 in justice are from my team. There's a bunch of all around, and they all have been accepted as natives, and they're now, if you look at the Ukrainian news, they take a big chunk of it, and they basically are totally wet native.
Oh, well, there is no doubt that people close to you from Georgia are now running very important positions and offices inside the Ukrainian government. I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but I want to pause and just reflect for a minute on what you bring to the table from Georgia. For a start, it is strange, to say the least, that you felt that taking this position in Ukraine also made it necessary for you to renounce your Georgian citizenship. Why did you do that?
Well, because right now the whole region's fate is being decided in Ukraine. If Ukraine, God forbid, falls, and I think it will hold, then the whole region will be gone.
I understand your point that Ukraine is an incredibly important theatre right now, where one of the most significant moments in Europe's modern history is taking place. I understand you feel that way, but I just want to talk about Georgia for a minute. The former Prime Minister of Georgia, Mr. Ivanishvili, who of course was an opponent of yours, he says, I pity our Ukrainian friends because Mr. Saakashvili's counsel may prove disastrous. His appointment there is dangerous for Ukraine.
Who cares what this man says? And I can tell you Ukrainians care the least of all. But the reality is that, if Ukraine holds, then Georgia will survive. And the reason why Ukrainians have been bringing me with Georgia background is very obvious. Ukrainians are well aware what had changed in Georgia under my leadership, and that's exactly what they would like to see in Ukraine.
Well, they went to war with Putin because of you, and they lost. I mean, you lost.
First of all, we haven't lost because we haven't won either. We have preserved our statehood. Russia keeps occupying a big chunk of Georgian territory, just as they did in Ukraine. But until these countries statehood continues to exist, democracy continues to exist. These countries still have struggling institutions and people who want to stand up for independence, no matter who they are in the government, even in the case of Georgia. Still, these countries are continuing to challenge by their very existence of their democracies, as imperfect as they might be, the whole notion of what Putin might stand for. So that's why I think that it's still an ongoing battle.
Right. You said when you took this job in Ukraine, in Odessa, you said, you know, my job is to help build a new Ukraine. You talked about the drive against corruption, the drive to turn around the economy. It is a little bit problematic, given that platform, is it not? That you actually face indictment and serious criminal charges in your own country, the country which you've renounced, for major abuses of power. That could you see you locked up if you ever get to a court for 5 to 8 years?
Look, you call them serious, but nobody takes them seriously. Indeed, on last December, when I was invited as a guest of honor to the European Parliament, and the whole European Parliament denounced Georgian charges as politically motivated.
If they're so obviously politically motivated, go back to Tbilisi, face the court, and make your case.
The last thing I want to do, and there's a big report on that on OSCE, done by OSCE mission that studied and monitored Georgian court case, and they say there's extensive abuse of preliminary detention. Indeed, some of my fellow government members are in prison already for almost 1.5 years, and under Georgian law it's maximum of 9 months detention without in violation of all the terms. So last thing I would like to do now is to waste my time sitting in a prison on the capricious demands of the biggest private shareholder of Gazprom. That's what Ivanishvili is, a Russian oligarch. He came to Georgia with a mandate to prosecute us. He imprisoned some of the people. This is not just...
You throw mud at him just as he throws mud at you. But the bottom line is the prosecutor's office in Tbilisi consulted with some of the leading legal minds in the world right now, including Sir Geoffrey Nice, who's been on this program, a leading UK barrister, to look at the credibility of the charges against you. And they say...
I'm a practicing lawyer. When people do retire, they can hire just anybody for money, and they can produce just anything. But even this group couldn't produce anything.
It's not a good look, though, is it? I mean, here you are saying you're going to clean out Odessa, you're going to deliver a much cleaner city, because Odessa's been riven with corruption, people, trafficking and smuggling for an awful long time. You say you're Mr. Clean, but the fact is a former defense minister in Georgia accuses you of asking him to carry out a murder.
No, come on, they can say just anything, but the facts are very stubborn. The facts are that when I became Georgia's president, Georgia was number 137 on the ease of doing business list. It became number 8. No other Soviet country made it, former Soviet country, Eastern European made it to top 10. Georgia, under my leadership, became one of the least corrupt countries in Europe and the safest country in Europe on my watch. Georgia's budget went up 11 times while taxes were decreased 60 times. Georgia is a role model of transformation, clean government, and this is the only country, by the way, that had in the post-Soviet space, except of course the Balts, that had both the government serving the whole term and peaceful, ordered transition. Now, the idea...
You made the case very persuasively, but the fact is the Georgian people rejected you.
Yeah, that's
the
fine.
Georgian public rejected you, the current government in Tbilisi wants to lock you up.
The Georgian government British government rejected Senator Winston Churchill. Not that I'm comparing myself with him, but people do reject even the most successful governments after a while. Lee Kuan Yew used to say that after 10 years, more than any successful government would be rejected just for the sake of people to see the change. And that's what I anticipated would happen. Well, the governments are different ones. Some of the governments are vicious, some of them are revengeful, some of them are revanchist, some of them are ridiculous, as the government in Georgia is. Because if you look now, there are only 2 countries in the world where I cannot go: Russia and Georgia. I've been welcomed by most of the heads of state, even after I retired. In Europe, I've been, working and having also official contacts in the United States. I go to all kinds of international forums as a reformer, and I don't talk about Georgian government. When I'm in Ukraine, I don't talk about this present Georgian government. I don't even think about this present Georgian government because we have issues up there, we are there to stand up for new cause. And I think that Ukrainian people are very supportive, and these questions are not being asked by Ukrainian people, I assure you, because Ukrainians do go to Georgia, and Ukraine looks like now in terms of corruption, crime, and infrastructure, like Georgia used to look at the beginning of my presidency. They go to Georgia to see something else.
All right, Mr. Saakashvili, let me stop you there. It's clear from our conversation so far, you have no intention of going back to Georgia anytime soon.
I don't agree with
That's
that.
fine, let's move on.
I do have.
Well, you're not going to, because if you do, you'll face a trial and you're not
My
going to
party
face
in
it.
Georgia, according to last polls I have, is running neck to neck with the...
Hang on, are you telling me that you credibly believe you can still represent the party in Georgia when you've renounced Georgian citizenship, when you face a trial?
I'm still
political leader are you in Georgia?
There's legal technicalities, but nobody can take away from me the historic fact that me and my friends have created a place where no real state that exists, a real modern European-style democracy with all the shortcomings. And so this is not going to be taken away. At any moment,
more people than any other Georgian leader. Your record on human rights and free media was appalling. I don't know quite what Georgia you're talking about.
Georgia, in terms of per capita prisoners, was behind Luxembourg, Finland, in terms of safety, but these are figures. No matter what they're saying, I'll tell you what the figures are. And the reality is that Georgia became, from being a country run by organized crime, the safest country in Europe, based on the EU survey, 4 years in a row. Well, and it comes at a price. It comes at the price of cracking down on criminals, organized crime. But that's exactly what we are facing now in Ukraine. That's why Ukrainians want us to do exactly the same thing what we did in Georgia, crack down on
Well, that's interesting. Let's talk now about Ukraine and your appointment and what it says. You say I was hired because of my record in Georgia and they want me to do the same thing in Ukraine. Absolutely. There are many observers who believe that President Poroshenko appointed you because of your record, shall we say, of confronting Vladimir Putin. You, I think it's fair to say, are one of Vladimir Putin's #1 enemies. He once said that he wanted to hang you by the balls.
Yeah, well, he's fun. He said it several times. He's very much interested in different parts of my body and my existence.
So is that what you bring to the table in Ukraine? No. You an atmosphere and a mindset of all-out confrontation with Vladimir Putin.
But let's see what's at stake in Ukraine. It's not about whether we can militarily defeat Russia or not. It has never been, we have to defend Ukraine. There are, by the way, lots of Georgian officers that came together with me on their own to fight for Ukraine. Some of them have died for Ukraine. That really shows that it's an international cause.
Yeah, and on that subject, pause for a sec, because you say it's an international cause, and that's why me and my Georgian friends are there. The allegation in Moscow is that many of the staff in your office in Odessa today are being paid for by the US government. Is that true?
No, but
hang on, is it true?
It's not true. But
so who is funding all of the staff?
US government has expressed very strong support for our anti-corruption search.
Are they providing funds?
They are providing funds for the programs that we are running, but these are not government officials. These are people from which these are programs from which we take.
It's a very fine distinction. There's a lot of US money behind you.
I'll tell you, we are doing now, for instance, the service center where we'll have the fastest services in the region, issuing IDs, property transactions, all these things for which Ukrainians are used to pay bribes. We'll provide it for free of bribes and of course in very speedy manner. And this thing is funded by the whole preparatory process by the US. Will probably fund the enaction of a new Ukrainian customs that will be very different from what we had. Of course, these are experts, these are specialists on whom we rely.
New customs funded by the
Americans, but we will work with them.
And you also made a big point of telling the world, hang on, about the California police who are coming to
California police. Actually, today we had the first march of new police, exactly tailored after the Georgian model.
This is precisely what Moscow is talking about.
Fine.
Behind all of the power in Ukraine is a United States agenda. Well, you have come to personify and symbolize.
If you are talking about, first of all, if you are talking about foreigners, maybe Georgians are the biggest force behind it, and it's not even official Georgia. It's basically people from my government, first of all. Second, it's Ukrainians themselves doing that stuff. And President Poroshenko, when he invites foreigners to do it, and I still think he is the best hope for reform in Ukraine, and he has this radical approach. And he's trying all kinds of different approaches. He's bringing people from successful countries. Now, what Putin might be irritated at is not the fact that I'll stir up war, because I went to this region to avoid war, actually. If this region stays as it is, poor, corrupt, worse roads in Europe, people desperate and destitute, of course it will be much more easy to stir up trouble, to flare up the inter-ethnic violence and all, etc., at which Russians are very good. However, If we manage to curb corruption, and which I think we will, if we have new police, if we have new prosecutors, if people are no longer, abused by the government and are forced to pay bribes, if there is better infrastructure and roads, then of course Putin is going to lose. And Putin is getting nervous precisely for that.
And you want to
I was put there because of that, not because I had to imitate Putin.
No, on the contrary, you talk about all of your civic responsibilities and how you're going to change the city. The fact is, as one veteran observer has put it, you represent a red cape right in front of the Russian bull, which is about to charge again. You are a provocation.
Look, Georgia was a provocation to Putin for a simple reason that Russia started to ask questions. If small Georgia, that was so desperately hopeless, could build better roads than Russia with its oil, could make better system, could make one of the worst, best police force in the world, how can Russia not make it? And indeed, the same thing now is attributed to Ukraine. Odessa is very important. Why? Because Odessa also has this identity which is related to the important parts of Russian history. Culture, it's of course culture Ukrainian, but also it has big Russian cultural heritage.
Of course it does.
And it's a big Jewish heritage.
And they're very suspicious of you. The people in Odessa and the region who culturally, they speak Russian, they look to Moscow, they see you now as their governor, and they worry that you...
Stephen, we have the polls. No governor has ever been popular at this moment. I mean, it might be a honeymoon. Ever for the last 25 years.
Your region is not right now full of peace and harmony. We've seen 30 bombs go off in the last year. We've seen some of these so-called self-defense militias, self-appointed people on the streets with guns who are frightening some of the Russian-speaking population of your region. There is a sense that you and the people around you and the ideas that you're putting forward are deeply divisive in Odessa today.
When I went there, first order I gave is to remove all the people with guns from the streets, and we did it. First thing we did is to remove the roadblocks with, masked gunmen and, armored vehicles with guns pointed in all different directions. We need tourists.
You're telling me there are none of those men left?
No, they're not in the street. They might be somewhere, but not in the street. And right now, I'm very proud that this year already, according to our figures, we have almost doubling of tourists. Well, of course, you compare it with last year, and there are all reasons for that, like Crimea and others. But we really welcome tourists from all sides. We want Russian tourists to come. Well, we make sure that I just opened 2 days ago Odessa Film Festival, where we lots of Russians present, and I told them, look, we want also Russian tourists to come. We want this place, and in Georgia, we did unilaterally lift visas for Russians. We wanted Russia, and we had 1 million Russian tourists on my watch in Georgia.
If I may say so, that they may be welcome, but you speak out of both sides of your mouth, it seems to me, because on the one hand you're saying, we're a tourist destination, it's all warm and cuddly, and we love Russians. On the other hand, you've said,
we love tourists.
Odessa today and Ukraine today represent the same thing as West Berlin during the height of the Cold War. You say we are the front line of a war with Putin's Russia.
Can you imagine where
you're telling me you want to be a tourist destination? Your language is not a tourist destination.
Right now, Odessa is a calm place. We have war 400 or 500 kilometers away from Odessa. True it is. That's true. We have war of attrition. But look what kind of war it is. On the one hand, Russia, in Ukraine, Ukraine government has to report every casualty. Russians don't report any of their death. Ukraine has to. In Ukraine, there is a vivid, discussion what's happening on the war. They criticize everybody, starting from the president, officers. In Russia, they don't even recognize that war exists. On the one hand, you have people who basically Putin divert talking secret funds. In Ukraine, you have to convince every time the parliament to give more money to the army. So these are two systems fighting. Democracy, freedom, and what democracy and freedom should also emanate. Development, and that's what we're trying to achieve against all the odds.
It's sometimes hard to remember that you're actually the governor of Odessa, not the prime minister or the president of Ukraine.
But that's also...
we've spoken before, and you're using the same sort of ambitious, dramatic language with me today that you used when you were president. So there are a lot of Ukrainians who now believe you have national aspirations, that you one day could see yourself appointed perhaps by Poroshenko to be Ukraine's prime minister. Could you see that as credible?
I've heard this speculations. I'm right now focused on this job, but this is very much a national office, because things are being played out there that are national issues. That's why we have...
You really are ambitious. You're Georgian, for goodness sake. You really believe you can have national office in Ukraine?
I'm having right now, as other people who are in national role in Ukraine. That doesn't mean that I'm going to have central government office.
But you'd like it, wouldn't you?
No. I'm going to be focused on the job I'm doing. But this is something which is very, very important for the Ukrainian nation. I'm very happy with that. I decline national role. President Poroshenko was kind enough to offer me to become first vice prime minister of Ukraine, maybe number 3 or 4 position in the country, officially, formally. I declined it outright because it's sitting just in some government office in Kiev. I like to be in the field. It didn't really attract me to be one of their top leaders sitting in the government.
Maybe the phrase is not yet, but let's
that's the fact of life. I was offered that, I declined it. But I immediately grabbed, and I almost offered it myself, to go to the region which is the most difficult, because things that are being decided now, I thought that I could have been useful.
You thought you could be useful in Georgia when you were politically defeated in Georgia, and then
that's normal. That's how democracy
hang on, but when you left the country, let's face it, for all of your bellicose language about taking on Russia, still 1/5 of your country's territory was held by, de facto, by the Russians. Now look at Ukraine today. Is not Ukraine's fate to be another frozen nation with a locked-in conflict, just like Georgia, just like Moldova, you could say as well? That's Putin's ambition, it seems, and from everything we see today, Putin is going to get his way.
No, I'm very upbeat about Ukraine. First of all, Ukrainians have shown miracles in their fighting. It's such, we have, I've been to many times to the front line. I have officers also from Georgia, whom I know very well, who are fighting with alongside the Ukrainians. They're saying this is one of the best fighting experience in the world, and that's really fact of life. They've been resisting against all the odds, overwhelming Russian military force.
With all due respect, the insurgents, the rebels in eastern Ukraine hold territory that's bigger than the Netherlands.
I would not call them the insurgents holding it. It's a Russian invasion, and like during every invasion, there are local people who locally work with invaders, but this certainly a Russian military, not some insurgents. And second thing, one thing it's not about war only. If we really do all this reform in Ukraine, if we proceed with national force, which is now fact of life, it already exists in Kiev, huge change, U-turn of approach towards institutions. It's very much like Georgia, but it's Ukrainian way, and they're even better than Georgia's initiative were. Then if we do prosecutors reform and the real crackdown on corruption, which already started, if we do better infrastructure as what we're trying to do, if we improve Ukrainian customs as we will do now, because that's the new law that keeps us from competence, then we will be in position to tell Russians, to tell ordinary Russians, look, against all the things that you've done to us, your government has done to us, we've survived. That means that we have future, and that means that you also have future if you just get rid of this government and do mind your own business and do your own reforms.
That's a big agenda, and you seem to believe it can happen in Ukraine, but you need friends. Last question for you. Are you disappointed in the attitude that we've seen from President Obama leading the Western nations? Both in Georgia and in Ukraine, he's made it plain that they are not on a path to NATO membership. He refuses to supply weapons to Ukraine. Do you believe that your friends in Washington have let down Ukraine?
Well, I was in the United States, and President Poroshenko made this speech to the Congress, which I thought was one of the best speeches ever made in that building, at least on my...
I'm not asking you about that.
I saw the reception he got. And I saw that, and the sanctions that exist out there, they really do work. Now, I myself went to Washington to lobby for weapons, for defensive weapons for Ukraine. We didn't get most of them yet, so that's the other part of equation which needs to be there. But one thing is clear. When we started all these reforms, say in Odessa now, American ambassador, then British ambassador, then all the EU ambassadors came to the ground. They started to provide the funds for reform processes. They strongly supported, rhetorically supported. They do understand what's at stake there. What's at stake in Ukraine is the battle that's being played out. It's a battle for the future of Europe, for the very existence of Europe. It's a battle of two systems.
We're out of time, but you haven't given me a shot. I just want a yes or no. Has Obama, as of this moment, let you down?
I think we are still working with them. I think many of the things that have been done by Americans have been very helpful. We still have a long way to go, and we're primarily that we need more defensive assistance, no doubt about it, but also helping with the reforms. And there they've been doing a very good job. Sanctions have been helpful. Now we need some more on the military side. I think we will survive. I think we will overcome. And I think overall Putin will be defeated and the region will win. And Ukraine will win, as well as Georgia.
We'll get you back and revisit in some time to come. But for now, Mikheil Saakashvili, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.